This session is to do with taxonomy for A2 biology, so looking at plant and animal kingdoms. Okay, so in terms of plants, we know that they are multicellular, so made up of many different types of cells. They're eukaryotic cells, so they're normal type cells. They have a cellulose cell wall. They can photosynthesize using chlorophyll, and they are reasonably differentiated. Okay, the first division of these are called the bryophytes or mosses. Okay, they're more simple types of plants. They do not have true roots, they don't have stems, and they don't have leaves, and they also don't possess transport tissues, for example, xylem and phloem, which are known as vascular tissues. So support with mosses is by turgor. Okay, so in other words, they need to be full of water, and that's why you tend to find mosses in areas which are very damp and shaded. Okay, they're unable to control their loss of water, so therefore they live in very shaded and damp areas. Okay, as I said, they don't have true roots. They have these filamentous structures called rhizoids, and that helps them to be anchored into the ground. But as I say, they don't really have those true roots for water uptake, and they also don't possess structures that you would find in the leaf, like the cuticle or the stomata. Okay, so these are typical mosses that we would see. They have a spore-producing structure, which you can see up the top here. So they reproduce by spores, and we can see that here also. That may be visible during their life cycle. Okay, so reasonably simple plants. Okay, the next division is then looking at pteridophytes or ferns, which are a bit more complex in their structure and a bit later on in terms of evolution. So they do have true roots, they do have stems, and they do have leaves. Okay, so they also possess those vascular tissues like xylem and phloem, so they can use their xylem for the transport of water. Xylem is highly lignified, so it's a dead tissue, big thick walls, allows water to pass up from the roots up to the stem to the leaves, and the phloem is used to transport organic molecules like sugars, which are made in the leaves, to the growing tips, so the shoots and roots of the plant. Okay, they also have a cuticle and stomata in their leaves, which means that they are able to control water loss. Okay, ferns have this type of structure here, so they do have true roots. They tend to have an underground stem, which is known as a rhizome. Okay, from which other young ferns can grow. The bit that's seen above the ground is known as the frond. Okay, and they have these sort of almost like leaves with a pinna structure, and that sort of spiky structure that you would see of typical types of ferns. Here you can see as well, there's your typical ferns that you'd see, again, grow in a reasonably damp habitat. They have these little fronds underneath, which are their spore-producing structures, which you can see here, and that's how they reproduce. So there's your pinna on your sort of fronds or leaves there as well. Final plant structure then is looking at flowering plants or spermatophytes. So they, again, slightly more complex. They have, again, true roots, stems, leaves, waterproof cuticle, stomata. Again, they have vascular bundles, so xylem and phloem. Many flowering plants form trees, so they can have wood, which forms as they get a bit older, obviously, or as they develop. And that is mainly made up of the xylem, so they can develop that sort of wood structure. There are typical sort of flowering plants as well. Again, they can live in different types of areas. Some can be xerophytic, so live in very dry conditions. Some are adapted to live in very damp habitats. Okay, so that covers the plant kingdom. Moving on to the animal kingdom. Animal kingdoms can be divided into animals which are diploblastic. So in other words, they're made up of two layers, which you can see here. So you have the ectoderm around the outside, endoderm in the middle, and then they tend to have a gut or enteron, as it's called, structure in the middle. Okay, or they can be triploblastic, which, as it suggests, it means they're made up of three layers. So you have the ectoderm again around the outside, you have the mesoderm in the middle, and the endoderm, sorry, on the inside, and then you have that gut or enteron structure. Some of these triploblastic structures may be what is called columnate, or they have a body cavity or a column. It's not the gut. It sometimes is found inside the mesoderm. It's a fluid-filled cavity, which again is found in triploblastic animals, or mostly found in triploblastic animals. Also, in terms of symmetry of animals, you have radial symmetry, which essentially means you can cut through longitudinal section like so, and looking from above the transverse section, it is radially symmetrical, so it's been cut in different ways, looking at the top to the bottom. Okay, or they can be bilaterally symmetrical, which essentially means you've got a left-hand side and a right-hand side. Okay, for example, platyhelminths that we'll look at, or flatworms that we'll take a look at as well. Okay, first phylum is called Snideria, and again, they are sort of earlier in evolutionary terms. They are eutrophic cells, eukaryotic cells, and no cell wall, as we know with animal cells. And with these, you can see examples of jellyfish, Hydra, which we'll take a look at in a second. They have a soft sac-like body, which is filled with liquid. Okay, and they are diploblastic, so two layers, and the endoderm has that enteron, or lines the enteron or cavity. Okay, you can see the Hydra is an example here. So you have the ectoderm on the outside, endoderm on the inside. It lines this quite large enteron or gut. They only have one opening, so any food that passes in with the use of these tentacles can be used to catch the food and bring it to the mouth. Any food which passes in is broken down inside the Hydra. Any waste then leaves by the same opening. Okay, and that's looking from above. These will be radially symmetrical. There's your Hydra, little small Hydra there. They reproduce by asexual reproduction. So that's a little bud, which will eventually develop and get bigger and then break off. Okay, next phylum are the platyhelminths, which are essentially the flatworms. Okay, so again, multicellular, a bit more differentiation, a bit later in terms of evolutionary, referred to as the flatworms. They're flattened dorsoventrically, which essentially means top to bottom. So it's like somebody stood on them and squashed them. Okay, they are triploblastic in terms of three layers. So you have the ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm, and then that gut or enteron running through the inside. Okay. Again, we can see here so they have some structures to do with transport. So again, that's making them slightly more complicated. Okay, and again, similar to the Hydra or the Snideria, they have a single opening. So food will pass in one end, be broken down, and then waste will pass out the same opening. Okay, next one are our annelids, or our sort of normal earthworms, are examples of those. Again, these are triploblastic, so three layers. Which we can see that sort of ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm, they show bilateral symmetry. So that sort of left-hand side and right-hand side. And again, more complicated or more complex in terms of, I suppose, the anatomy or the physiology of the annelids. So they have that column, or that fluid-filled cavity inside the mesoderm. They show segmentation, as we'll see in a moment, and that allows them to have muscle, blood vessels, nerve supplies, as you can see there. They have a mouth and an anus, okay, so opening and leaving at different ends. So that's different from the platyhelminths and the Snideria, and gas exchange can take place along its whole body. There you can see, as that's a common earthworm, so you can see that segmentation, and that allows them to have those muscles for movement, the longitudinal and radial muscles, which allow them to contract and move. And also you can see a cross section there. They have that central or ventral blood vessels, and they have nervous tissue, etc., in there as well. Okay, that's showing the longitudinal section. So you can see the body column, or the body cavities there is the column, showing that segmentation here also. And the transverse section, you can see that triploblastic layer. So the column is found really in the middle of the mesoderm, and then you have the ectoderm and endoderm on the each side. Okay, again, showing you the transverse section through circular muscles, longitudinal muscles, allowing it to move. Okay, next one is looking at arthropods, which are essentially insects and spiders. So again, they show a bit more complexity. They have bilateral symmetry as well, which is your left-hand side and your right-hand side. They are triploblastic. Again, they have segmentation. So in this case, it's metameric segmentation, as we'll take a look at in a second. They have a reduced column. They have a complete digestive system in terms of mouth and anus, and they have the presence of a brain and a ventral nerve cord, as it suggests. Insects as well have an exoskeleton, which is like an external skeleton, and you can see that, or we can see the different segmentations that you have here. These can also be split into, again, more complicated head, thorax, and abdomen. And you can see that metameric segmentation in the thorax and the abdomen. They may have antennae, which link into its nervous system, mouth parts here, which are a bit more complex, legs for movement, and they may have wings, which enable them to fly. Okay, final phylum to look at is the chordates, which are essentially things with a backbone. So looking at mammals and birds, again, they show bilateral symmetry, a well-developed column, which allows room for digestive systems, nervous systems, etc. They have a large brain and spinal cord. Again, can be segmented into head, thorax, and abdomen. Complex nervous systems are mentioned. Muscles to allow movement. You have the front and back, and complete digestive system, jointed limbs and bones, and a skeleton, or skeleton on the inside. Okay, some diagrams or some little table here of the different types that you have. Again, you can pause that and have a look at that if you wish. Hopefully that will help with taxonomy in terms of animal and plant kingdoms for A2 biology.